Welcome to the final part of the Geek Critique's Classic Sonic Retrospective Series. Genesis Game Genie, also known as the reason I could beat any game at all when I was 6, asked me about Knuckles Chaotix. So, let's start with that. Knuckles Chaotix is the one and only Sonic-related game to be released for Sega's ill-conceived and iller-fated 32X add-on. It sort of occupies the same space in my memory as Sonic CD. I never had a Sega CD or 32X until I was a little older, and so the only time I got to play those games was on that special occasion when we would rent one of the add-ons from Blockbuster. Yeah, you could actually rent game consoles back then. Because of how rarely I got to play it, I absolutely loved it when I was a kid. But have time and perspective been kind to Chaotix? Well, the graphics are colorful and quite detailed, almost what you would expect a Sonic game to look like on the Super Nintendo. There's a wide cast of characters, and their diversity is matched only by their obscurity. The game shows off the unique abilities of the 32X, with sprite scaling, and the best polygonal effects the system could muster. And the music is absolutely glorious, including a few of my favorite tracks in the whole series. I think Sonic's special stages were always kind of meant to show off the tech, and that may be why I prefer the Sonic CD and Chaotix ones more than the others. Okay, yeah, I know this looks rough, but I have fun playing it. Chaotix has a new gimmick. You see, over in the main series, Sonic and Tails mode had become the default option. The second player could play as Tails, if they liked going off-screen over and over and over again. But aside from airlifting in Sonic 3, it didn't really add much. In Chaotix, the two characters are linked by a combi ring, and neither of them can ever go off-screen. This isn't such a bad idea. It's a little complicated, but there is an in-game tutorial that explains things well enough. It's kind of fun to use the elasticity of the chain to whip your characters up to speed, and you can even use it to ascend. It does sometimes break down, but once you get the hang of it, it can be pretty fun. So you would think that playing two-player co-op would be a blast with this setup, but you would be wrong. In single player, you can hold down B to freeze the other character in place, which is what makes most of these tricks possible. The hold mechanic is just too important for pulling off anything useful, and so in multiplayer, you end up just kind of dragging each other through the levels. Where Chaotix really falls apart though is the level design. Each of these 5 zones feature 5 acts, and there's very little that separates one from the other. Most of the level gimmicks are boring or just kind of time-wasting, and the controls and physics are pretty far removed from the precision of the main series. It's a simple, bland experience that feels like it was rushed out the door before development could put any polish on it. Jordy mentioned Sonic Chaotix, a ROM hack that replaces Mighty with Sonic. Since Sonic himself is my favorite Sonic character, this is usually how I play Chaotix. Sorry, Mighty, they'll find you someday. Tails got a couple games of his own too. The first of these was Tails Sky Patrol on the Game Gear, and what a strange game this is. It's kind of thematically distant from the rest of the classic series, with these weird, vaguely fantastical villains. Actually, they kind of remind me of the Deadly Six from Sonic Lost World. Hey, maybe that's why Tails knew about the Lost Text. But that's just a theory. A Sonic Okay, sorry. Tails is always flying in this one, and you have to throw this ring to latch onto things and destroy enemies. Sky Patrol was another Japan exclusive, and I don't think we really missed out on much. But this game, on the other hand, well, you wouldn't think a franchise as well known as this would be capable of featuring a cult classic. But Tails' Adventure is it. It's a strange mix of slow-paced, sort of Metroid-style exploration platforming, along with some light RPG elements. What's really neat about it is how well the gameplay meshes with Tails' character. He's supposed to be this mechanical genius, and in this game he has a workshop, he uses gadgets, with awesome 8-bit graphics, catchy music, and very distinct gameplay. It's easily one of the best games on the Game Gear. Check it out if you like games like this. It's available on the 3DS's Virtual Console. I'm not saying it's an epic or anything, but there's nothing else like it in the series, and honestly that's a shame, because I'd have loved to see what a sequel or two could pull off. But getting back to the Blue Blur himself now. In 1996, Sonic saw his final release for the system that the character itself had been designed for. The final Sonic game for the Sega Genesis was Sonic 3D Blast, and Sega called it Sonic 3D Flicky's Island across the pond for some reason. The most obvious change here is the isometric overhead perspective. The Genesis wasn't really able to handle true 3D games, but pre-rendered graphics like this have become all the rage in the wake of Donkey Kong Country. Despite the graphics, 3D Blast still feels like a game from the Genesis era, if that makes sense. And I think what really brings that together is the music. Most of it is absolutely fantastic, and with this being a fairly obscure entry in the series, I constantly hear it in fan hacks. It has a pretty familiar structure. Each zone has 3 acts, the third act is a boss act. It sounds great, and visually it's an absolute showcase for what the Genesis could pull off. It's just too bad the rest of the game isn't any fun. Like, at all. As in, I had serious trouble putting up with it long enough to capture this footage. For one, the overhead perspective means that Sonic just can't move very quickly, but that's only a minor complaint in comparison to the game's main mechanic. Flickies. You see, Flicky is this 80s arcade game, and its title character came to be featured as one of the many animals that Sonic rescues from badniks. 3D Blast takes that concept way too far by basing the entire gameplay around Flickies. Before you can pass each section of a level, you have to seek out and hold on to 5 differently colored Flickies and escort them to the gold ring. This is pure, absolute boredom. The graphics are nice, but they're not varied enough to warrant this kind of exploration. Everything just looks way too samey. The game still wouldn't be phenomenal or anything if you could just run through the levels normally, but at least it wouldn't be so tedious. In a happy note for your What Could Have Been file, Sonic Team at one time considered making Sonic 3 an isometric platformer like this. I'm really glad they stayed the course.
We are 5 years away from entering the 21st century.
Introducing Sega Saturn. Aww, hit it.
Finally, the next generation had arrived, and with it, the Sega Saturn. Backed by not 1, not 2, but 8 different processors, the system was set to catapult Sonic into a whole new era. As amazing as Mario 64 looked, I just knew that whatever Sega cooked up, it would blow Mario out of the water. I mean, just imagine a 32-bit Sonic game. Oh, look at that, it's a Flicky. Hey, buddy. Oh, it's another Flicky. And another Flicky. Oh no. Oh no! Oh no! It's Sonic 3D Blast! Again! Yes, Sonic made his Saturn debut with a port of his final Genesis adventure, and millions of Sonic fans the world over let out an apathetic sigh. At least it had a really great Red Book audio soundtrack and some absolutely gorgeous graphics for its time. There's all kinds of visual flair throughout the game. I especially love the foggy rain effect in Rusty Ruin, and while the special stages in the Genesis version were simple and undercooked, the Saturn version is anything but. They start off just like Sonic 2's Half-Life, but they quickly expand on that concept with corkscrews, tunnels, and even springs and platforms. To this day, they are honestly probably the best special stages the series has ever seen. Outside the special stages though, well, with clunky controls, long load times, and a noticeable lack of supersonic, all juxtaposed by still excellent music, Sonic 3D Blast was a harbinger of things to come when it came to the Hedgehog's leap to 3D. But why was such an overwhelmingly average game chosen to be Sonic's Saturn debut? I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that if a proper 3D Sonic game had been released that Christmas, I would have tried to get a Saturn instead of jumping on the N64 bandwagon. Well, Sonic Xtreme was announced for the Saturn that summer, because everything was extreme in the mid-90s. Screenshots like this blew my freaking mind when I was a kid. And then, the game just never happened. Quite a few of you asked me about prototypes, pirate carts, fan games, and yes, unreleased titles like Xtreme. Those are all beyond the scope of this main retrospective series, which, let's face it, is long enough already. But seeing as I don't plan to hit the adventure era until next summer, I'd be happy to do a video or two on these topics between now and then, if you guys are this interested. All you need to know for now is that Sonic Xtreme never saw the light of day, and in retrospect, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Imagine if they had tried to do a 2D Sonic game in 1986. It never could have worked, the tech just wasn't there. In much the same way, I don't think the world was really ready for a 3D Sonic game in 1996. Nothing was capable of rendering a 3D world at that kind of speed. Still, a complete lack of a mainline Sonic game dealt a critical blow to the Saturn. But Sonic fans were thrown a bone in the world's most extravagant demo disc, Christmas Nights. Sonic Into Dreams is notable, as this was the first time he could ever be fully controlled in a polygonal 3D environment. He runs through Spring Valley, collecting Idea before squaring off against a hilariously reskinned Puffy dressed up like Eggman. It's weird, it's clunky, it's not aging well, but it is awesome, both as a historical piece and as a piece of bonus content. OKG Dragon asked me about Michael Jackson's involvement with Sonic 3, and you're right, I didn't say a word about that. And it's mostly because the topic has been done so comprehensively and by so many people, I'd just be redundant. But the evidence, from song similarities, to interviews, to Sega reworking the music in the Sonic & Knuckles collection, this all leads me to believe that Jackson was involved on at least some of Sonic 3's tracks. On a side note, I'd recommend you check out Q Jimbo's old documentary on the subject. It was actually the first YouTube video I ever favorited, all the way back in 2006. 7Qs and 77s wanted to know about Freedom Planet, an indie platformer that came out recently, which takes a lot of cues from classic Sonic. I think it looks amazing, but I haven't had the time or monetary resources to try it yet. Meanwhile, VK Mize wanted to know how much better a game DuckTales would be if it too starred an anthropomorphic blue hedgehog. That's a really oddly specific question, but the answer is obvious. The NES couldn't even handle such an awesome game, so it's a moot point. I spent the month leading up to Christmas 1997 doing two things: dreaming of the Sega Saturn and obsessively playing Diddy Kong Racing. Here's one of those things that only a 9-year-old is capable of. I unwrapped that Saturn, I put in Sonic R, and after one race, I proudly proclaimed Sonic R superior to Diddy Kong Racing. I was wrong. Oh god, I was wrong. Where Diddy Kong Racing is one of the best racing titles ever made, and a game still unparalleled in some areas, Sonic R is, well, to call the track selection lacking would be a gross understatement. Let me put it like this. 1997 saw the release of 3 mascot racing games. Mario Kart 64 had 16 courses. Diddy Kong Racing had 20 courses. Sonic R has 5! The controls are clunky and awkward, and the characters are horrendously unbalanced. It's cheap, it's short, it's broken, and I love this game so much! I love the Emerald Collection, I love the cheesy soundtrack, I love all 5 courses! Yeah, this might just be my ultimate guilty pleasure. Sonic R, for all its faults, is still a game I just really enjoy playing. It gets an awful rep, and it always has, but I honestly don't think it's even nearly as bad as it's made out to be. I would never say that Sonic R is a good game, but it's certainly not the worst. No. You want really bad Sonic games? This one gets my vote for the worst in the series, and I am including the modern era. Sonic Jam for the Gamecom. The nadir of the entire series, saved only thanks to its own obscurity. It claims to feature the Genesis classics, just like the Saturn version, which we'll get to in a minute. But make no mistake, this is Sonic Jam in name only. Choose from Sonic 2, 3, or Sonic & Knuckles, then play a single linear zone vaguely based on each one. Thrill at the slowdown as the system struggles to play the ring sound effect. Look, this barely even qualifies as a game. The scary thing is that I was lucky enough to have a Gamecom when I was a kid. And as far as Gamecom games go, Sonic Jam was one of the better ones. Now that our eardrums have been dissected thanks to that abomination, I got a lot of questions about music. That's not too surprising, I guess. Even the bad Sonic games usually have awesome music, but aside from Sonic CD, I barely touched on any of it. To be honest, I'm not really that much of a musically inclined person. In fact, I hardly ever even listen to it these days. I really prefer podcasts. Not to say I don't enjoy music, just that it's not generally something that interests me. Because of that, if I were to try Balta Bueno's suggestion here, I think I'd have trouble explaining why I think a song is good, other than, it makes my ear holes feel nice. Partly meant to get a lot more specific, and that I can do. Sonic the Fighter soundtrack was fine, but Sonic R's was legendary. My favorite song from the classic era. For 8-bit, it's Bridge Zone. For 16-bit, it's Ice Cap Act 2. For Red Book Audio, I'd go with Sonic Boom, but Super Sonic Racing is probably a close second. I can't really pick an overall favorite. As for Remix, that would be an album featuring remixes from Sonic CD, all done by the original composers. I'd surprisingly just kinda never listened to it until now, but it's serving as cool background music while I'm scripting this. The one Sonic arcade game that I have played is Sonic the Fighters, though it took 9 years. The game was developed by AM2, the same studio that did Virtua Fighter, and it was based on that engine. It had a very limited release in the US, and a Saturn port was nothing but vaporware, because imagine how dangerous it would be to release too many Sonic games on the Saturn. So most of us wouldn't play it until it was featured in Sonic Gems Collection in 2005. By then, the game had aged quite a bit, but it was still awesome to finally experience it. Sonic really has seen a ton of compilations and re-releases over the years, and while I'm not going to bother talking about most of them, one stands significantly above the others.
Sonic Jam!
Sonic Jam was released for the Saturn in 1997. It featured each of the 4 Genesis titles that had brought Sega to the height of the industry. Each game also had a digital manual, brand new difficulty settings, a time attack that keeps records, and the ability to play through the special stages sequentially. It also ported a spin dash into Sonic 1, and if that was all that Sonic Jam featured, it would already be the best compilation of the classic titles to this day. But Jam also had Sonic World, our first real taste of what a dedicated 3D Sonic game might be like. For the most part, it's a museum space, from which you can access things like a guide to Sonic's history, character artwork, and bizarre Japanese commercials and short features. Sonic Jam was the biggest reason I asked for a Saturn that Christmas, and compilation or not, it was definitely worth it. Hey, what an appropriate way to close out the classic era. Yes, we have reached the end of the series. What a long, strange trip it's been. When I started this retrospective, I had a few goals. I wanted to showcase why Sonic was such an influential title, both for the industry at large and for me personally. I wanted to highlight that contrary to popular belief stating Sonic was good then and bad now, Sonic's always had his share of groundbreaking epics, forgettable adventures, and utter crap. But there's so much cynicism and negativity about Sonic nowadays, to the point that certain groups push the utterly ridiculous notion that Sonic was never good to begin with. I wanted to take a stand against that, and figured the best way to do it was to critique these games. And I've gotten a lot of comments from people who never gave classic Sonic a fair shot until they saw my videos. That is probably the ultimate compliment. I hope these games mean to you what they have meant to me. Next summer, the Geek Critique Sonic retrospective will continue, as Sega's final console heralds a new era of adventure.